I'm actually really excited for this next message. George Ferko is going to be talking about Stress Mastery 101. And here's why I'm excited. Raise your hand if you're in school.
I'll print it out.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Me too. How many of you are a little bit stressed out by school? Yeah, that's also what I figured. That's why this message is going to be awesome, especially balancing school, balancing life, balancing work, management training. So a little bit of background on George Ferko. Before Vector, George worked as an engineer conducting scientific research, developing the next generation of transparent armor under government grants. That's pretty cool. He's from a small town in Pennsylvania. And when he first started with Vector, he started with Elijah Sheets as the sales rep. So I asked Elijah just a couple of thoughts on George Ferko. And what he said was, George is innovative, loyal, and charismatic. This makes him a great leader and an even greater friend. All right, so we also just saw earlier today that he was one of 6 winners so far in the region of the President's Banquet, which definitely means he works hard, and it also means that he's good at his job. So to teach you guys how to handle stress like a champion, let's give it up for George Ferko.
All right. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Does this work? It does. Good. So coming around right now is a handout. It's not notes on today's talk. What it is that handout is about your own personal journey of self-reflection about the things that I'm going to talk about here today. So it's something that you can start to fill out while I'm giving the talk and as you think about these things, but it's separate from what I'm talking about here. It's related, but it's separate. What I'm going to try to do here today for you guys is I'm going to try to spare you the next half decade of figuring things out as far as your own stress management and share with you some of the things that really I struggled with and what I did to work through them as I went through graduate school, quitting graduate school, starting here, moving to a new area, starting an office, all of those things. First, before I even dive into those things, I started with Vector when I was already 24 years old. I had already been a graduate student. I had been an engineer, a researcher. And as I've been here at Vector, I've watched a lot of my friends do things like finish MBAs, go to law school, become doctors, and I've gotten some unique perspective from them about stress. And I want to talk a little bit about those and why it's important. I want to give you a framework today to help you think about stress and to help you change how you think about stress. First, what is stress really? Stress is a response that you have to a high workload or a high load of something, let's say adversity or something, but it's a response that you as an individual have. See, a circumstance in itself is not stressful. Something happening in your life is not stressful. You choose to be stressed out about it. And I want to help you change that choice. Because large workloads and huge amounts of responsibility are necessary for you to contribute anything significant to the world, not here, but in anything that you do. If this is the last thing that you ever do with Vector, the things that I'm going to talk about here today are still going to help you enormously if you want to make a difference for anyone other than just yourself throughout the rest of your life. So I want to give you some examples. I have a good friend from Lehigh, Michelle Goldberg, who last year finished her law degree and finally passed the bar. She went to Boston University for law school. It's one of the top 20 law schools in the nation. And I asked her for this talk, what was the most stressful thing about law school? And she said, and you'll start to notice a trend as well, she said she was given more work in law school than was ever possible for any human being to complete, and had to deal with at all times knowing that she could be called on that information herself. Because in law, there is no end of the assignment. You learn as much about a case history and a certain topic as you possibly can, and then you present the best possible argument. But there is no end of the work. You could work indefinitely on any case, on any subject matter. And because of that, because in these highly competitive schools, everyone is competitive, obviously, all of them work endlessly. And they do things like stop eating and stop sleeping to compete with each other to try to be the top. And she's since finished that. I have a good friend, Leilani, as well. Leilani is Irish-Hawaiian, which is an interesting combination. And when I met her in Philly, she had just restarted her residency. If you guys are unfamiliar with a medical residency, it's basically like planned torture of soon-to-be doctors. It's insane. They are given 80 hours of scheduled work a week, but most of them work closer to 115, 120, 125 hours because it's impossible to do the work that they need to in that 80 hours. Leilani had originally thought she wanted to be a surgeon, so she went through an internal medicine residency and then a specialization in surgery, decided that wasn't for her, quit, and restarted the residency program to finish her residency in emergency medicine. She did it twice, essentially, tortured herself, and she knew it was going to be torture. And today she's a doctor. People in their medical residencies, there are psychologists in the hospital specifically to help them with the emotional breakdowns that everyone knows they're going to have because of the amount of work that they're given. This is something that people at the highest levels of professionalism in our country do. I think about people like some of my friends that went into, say, corporate finance or wealth management or accounting, and the things that they've done up on Wall Street in New York, or I guess down on Wall Street from here. And here's an article from the Wall Street Journal from last year. For undergraduate interns at Goldman Sachs, which is one of the most prestigious investment banks in the world, Goldman had to impose a company-wide rule that the undergraduate interns were not allowed in the office between midnight and 7 a.m. because they literally wouldn't leave the office because they wanted to work that hard. And I think about, my goodness, what if our branch managers or even our sales reps worked that hard here? You'd all make like over $100,000 this year. But the point is that these people, they're working themselves as hard as they possibly can. Some of them look at those things as stress and some of them don't. I think about one of my good friends, Dane, worked at Goldman Sachs after we went to Lehigh together as undergraduates. And some of these offices, they have rules, like dress code rules, like you have to wear your suit a certain way, you can only wear white or light blue shirts, brown or black shoes with a matching belt, and violations of the dress code are a fireable offense. They're intense about the way that they do things. I think about, for some of you, you might want to go into science. This is me, as a researcher in a clean room. When I was doing engineering research, I started doing my research in 2009 as an undergraduate, and in 2011 I gave my first talk at a conference to a bunch of government officials and professors and experts in the field. And over those 2 years I worked incredibly hard at that research, and it's so hard that the week before I presented at that conference I went to the emergency room because I thought I was having a heart attack. Because I had slept a total of 16 hours in the previous week before that, trying to finalize my research and finish everything. And I always believed, as many people believe, that it was for a purpose and for a reason and to do something significant for the world. And I still believe that, despite the fact that I quit engineering. It wasn't because of the stress, it was because I just didn't like the idea of working in a laboratory for the next decade of my life. I like the challenge, the stress. And it wasn't until my time here with Vector that I really started to learn how to deal with these things and think about these things. So, for those of you that don't know anything about my history with the company, I started with Elijah Cheeks, as was mentioned, and at about $13,000 in career sales, I moved down to Philadelphia, an area where I'd never lived before, where I had no friends, and no connections. Which is a problem when you make your money through doing demos with people that you know and then getting referred to other people. So it was really difficult for me in that first summer. In fact, two of my best referrals came from Earl Kelly in the back of the room, who I met when we first moved to that office. So thank you for that, Earl. Without your help, I probably would have never made it. While that summer, I wasn't sleeping a lot, I was working a lot, plus I was in a new city. And I was living in a nice part of the city where a lot of people like to go out, so I was also staying up really late and having a lot of fun. And I kept getting sick, and I kept telling myself that I was getting sick because I was fatigued, because I wasn't sleeping enough. And you've heard people say before, like, if you don't get enough sleep, you're gonna get sick, or if you're too stressed out, you're gonna get sick, and these things are going to affect your health. And then one day I watched this TED Talk. Has anyone seen this TED Talk before? So Kelly McGonigal did this TED Talk, and it changed the way that I think about stress and sleep and fatigue and how they actually affect you. And I'm going to share some of her thoughts about what really happens there on a physiological level, on a biological level, what is happening to your body, and how can we change those things. So First, I want to help you understand your mindset about stress is the thing that has the biggest impact for you. In this talk, she describes a study where over 8 years, 30,000 adults were tracked. And they asked those 30,000 adults in the last year, how would you rate the level of stress in your life? You know, from a level of 1 to 10. Some people were obviously low, some medium, some high. And then they just watched to see when those people died. And what they realized is that, so the people who rated their lives as being very high stress, they were 43% more likely to die than the people who rated their lives as being low stress. Crazy. But here's where it gets even crazier. They asked them another question. They also asked them, do you believe that stress negatively affects your health? And what they discovered is that the only people who were more likely to die, that had high stress in their life, were the people that believed that stress negatively impacts their health. The people that had high levels of stress in their life, but did not believe that stress affected their health, those people actually lived longer than even the people with low levels of stress in their life. Which means that stress did not kill anyone, but the belief of stress during this time was estimated to have killed over 182,000 people. Now, if their estimates are right, and by the way, in your handout, there's supporting scientific articles if you're that kind of person about these things, on the resources at the end, because, you know, he's a scientist, so gotta give you the goods. But if their estimates are right, then that would make stress, not stress, but the belief that stress hurts your health, the number 15 killer in the United States. It means that more people die every year from the belief that stress is harmful for them than people that die of HIV/AIDS, homicide, and skin cancer here in the United States. And if this sounds like pseudoscience, read the articles. It's real. The belief that stress is harmful for you is the thing that actually hurts you, not the stress itself. Your beliefs are the things that affect what happens to you. And I ask myself, what really happens when we encounter adversity or challenges or huge workloads? Because some of you might choose to take on this coming summer bigger workloads than you've ever taken on before. Maybe you'll choose to run a branch and put your heart into it. Or maybe you'll choose to run a district and you'll give it all that you possibly can. And what happens when you decide to make these massive commitments, as people have talked about here today? Well, things happen like your heart rate increases. Maybe sweating begins a little bit when you do things that are new. Testosterone increases, adrenaline increases, oxytocin increases. And as it turns out, for those that believe that stress affects your health, other things happen. Like you experience vascular constriction. And what that means is that your heart rate is increasing, your blood vessels they're narrowing, and because of that, this is a poor state to be in. You know, it gives you poor heart health, it increases your chances of heart disease. Now, for the people that perceive adversity and challenges as opportunities, they look at those things as like a great thing. I look at a huge workload as being an awesome thing. They experience a different hormonal response that allows them to be in a similar state of cardiovascular state that's similar to states of courage and confidence, pride and commitment. And this is a much healthier profile. And my suggestion here is that when you think about stress and huge workloads and taking on enormous things, that you start to think of them as opportunities to prove who you are. That you start to look at your increased heart rate and increased blood flow and that sweating in your hands, not as anxiety, but as your body preparing itself to take on great things. And we know that doing a lot is important. Because if you've ever done nothing for any period of time in your life, you know that it doesn't feel good. And after I left engineering, after I left Lehigh, I'm kind of a prideful person, so I didn't move home at first, but eventually I realized that couch surfing wasn't the best way to live. And I decided to move back to my parents' house, and I had nothing to do but search for the next step for about 4 to 5 months. I spent most of my time in my parents' basement, really not doing anything, as my friends were, kicking butt on Wall Street and going to medical school and all those other things. And that doesn't feel good. Sometimes we tell ourselves that we need a break or we need to take it easy. But in reality, we never feel good or proud of those things. 30 years from now, you won't look back at the Netflix binges that you had or the naps that you took and reminisce about them and tell other people about them. And my suggestion isn't that you work hard just at work, at the things that we call work, but that you work hard at everything. That you take on huge responsibilities in everything that you do. With your friends, with your family, spiritually, physically, and of course professionally as well. Because those giant challenges that you overcome and that you deal with, the ones that keep you up at night, those things will be the things that you remember and the things that make you proud. And it's been that case for me as well. So overall, in mindset, what I've come to realize throughout all of this is that you really don't have control over what happens to you, or what people say, or what they do around you. But you have control over your feelings. You have control over your perception and how you think about things. Sometimes to accomplish what it is you want to accomplish, you have to take on enormous amounts of work that you can't possibly achieve it all. And that's okay, as long as you look at that as an opportunity. And I've given you some further reading here from some favorite pieces of reading that have really helped me through those things. One is Marcus Aurelius. His book, Meditations, was never meant to be a book, but he inherited the Roman Empire. He's called the last of 5 good Roman emperors, or the philosopher king. He's a great guy. One is Ryan Holiday, who wrote The Obstacle is the Way. And the last is, of course, Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress, whose TED Talk we just dealt with there. The point is stress is something that we create. A situation is not inherently stressful. We choose to perceive it as being stressful. But changing your perception is only step one. Once you've changed your perception, now let's start to think about how do you actually manage these huge responsibilities? How do you deal with enormous workloads? How do you handle them in a way that causes you to never feel like you've underachieved? And that's what I'm going to give you now. I'm going to help you build the toolkit for maintaining your perception of stress and for preventing breakdowns. And I'm going to help you handle and manage huge responsibilities and huge workloads with the rest of the talk here. This is the Wheel of Life. Has anyone ever seen one of these before? So this particular one comes from a guy named Hal Elrod, who wrote The Miracle Morning. And in the Miracle Morning book, he includes links to his supplementary materials, which I don't even think that you need the book in order to get these. I think you can just go to themiraclemorningbook.com, which there's a link in your handout, and I think you can download all of his supplementary materials. This wheel changed my life when I did this wheel. And the reason I say that is because I was experiencing a point of extreme unhappiness. I had just closed my first office and moved to a new area. I was living in a town that I didn't really want to live in. And I thought, maybe this job isn't for me. After a period of 4 months of huge commitment, I had doubts, and I was extremely unhappy. And I listened to this book, I didn't read it, and then I did this workbook. And for the first time, I realized that physical environment, my home and my office, were really important to me. And I was living in this terrible little house. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't exactly nice. And my office wasn't the prettiest place in the world. And I had rated those things as a 1, and I realized how important they were to me. And I wasn't able to move right away, but I just started doing things like going to beautiful places and going to nice restaurants. And being in that physical environment was exciting for me. And the reason that I share this with you is because time and time again, I've had people come into my office and say to me, I need to quit. I can't handle, I'm working too much. I'm not spending enough time with my family. Work is interfering with school and all sorts of other things. And for some of them, I just let them quit. But for the ones that I wanted to keep, I gave them this exercise and I let them do it. And for most of them, what they found is that the things that were upsetting them the most had nothing to do with work or what they originally thought they were. It was another part of their life that they had neglected. Like they hadn't spent time with their grandmother in 2 months or something that was waiting there in the back of their brain. They just needed that self-awareness to know what was really bothering them. It was never that they had too much on their plate. Is someone keeping time, by the way? Yes. Good. I'll need signals of some kind. Anyway, I have 15 minutes? Good. It was never that they were working too much or that they weren't focusing enough on school. It was something else entirely. My point is that the solution is almost never to do less. We already know that doing less doesn't ever make you feel better or more satisfied or happier. The solution is always to have a greater understanding of what it is you really need to do or what else you need to do. So, once you understand where you are and once you've got these things figured out, then you can decide where to go next and how to get there. And that's what I want to talk about next. Time is our only finite resource. It's the only thing that we can never get more of. When I go to a restaurant and I sit down, maybe when you go to a restaurant, you spend like an hour and a half there. I spend the first 10 minutes planning out what I'm going to eat. Appetizers, food, how it's going to be cooked, all of those things, side dishes. Think about that. That means that 10 minutes out of a total of 90 minutes, over 10% of my time is spent planning out what I'm going to eat. That's how we treat restaurants. Imagine if you treated your day like that. There are 24 hours in a day. What if you spent 10% of it planning out what you're actually going to do with your day? It's the most important thing. Time is the only thing you can't get more of, yet most of the time, we aren't even planning out how we're going to use it. We aren't even thinking about it. And this is what gives us real fulfillment. So I'm not saying that you have to have the same system as me for managing your time, but you need to have a system. If you don't have a system, how can you ever achieve anything? And how much of your time should you plan out? You should plan it all out. You should plan out when you go to sleep. You should plan out when you're going to do things with your friends. I want you to know that that blank space in your schedule is not space that is free time. That blank space is being managed by other people. Mostly by people like Reed Hastings and Steve Huffman and Mark Zuckerberg, the CEOs of Netflix, Reddit, and Facebook. So they're taking over your time. And it's the one thing that you can't get more of, and you're letting them have it. Don't let other people take your time away from you. Choose how you're going to use your time. Once you have a system and you filled in how you want to use your time, then you can start to understand, what do I need to do with my activity to accomplish what I want to accomplish? And if you've ever made a plan to do something before, you know that in almost every plan, almost everything goes wrong almost all the time. So the important thing about how you use your time is that you also think about what you're going to do when everything goes wrong in your schedule, and that you have contingency plans. You plan out what it is you're going to do to achieve the things you want to achieve, even when your original plan doesn't work out. The other benefit of having a system for dealing with your time and how you spend your time is that you're now allowed to get excited about everything in your schedule. When you just do things at random, or you say things like, I'm just going to do as much as I can. One, you can never feel fulfilled because you can never reach your full potential. It's impossible. It's an abstract idea. But when you have things in your schedule, you can find ways to get excited about them. Organizing your time gives you an opportunity to contemplate what you're going to do. I used to hate getting up early in the morning. I used to hate it so much. I still can't wake up to alarms. But I've gotten in this cycle of getting excited about the things that I'm going to do in the morning, the book that I'm going to read, the smoothie I'm going to drink, the coffee that I'm going to make. I drink really, really good coffee. I have a French press. I've got this amazing setup. It's great. And I get excited about it in the morning. You know, I used to hate going on campus and advertising in the morning. But then I bought this silly bracelet that tracks the number of steps that I take and stuff and tells me how many calories I burn. And I realized that if I go on campus in the morning, I would make like 5,000 steps and I burn a lot of calories. And I started to get excited about that for weird reasons. I had things in my schedule and I found ways to get excited about them. Today I can say that I'm excited about everything in my schedule that I'm going to do today. After this, we're going to Good Times. The name isn't misleading. It's a good time. Once you've started to organize your time, you will also realize that you have a finite amount of time. Maybe a lot more than you think though. We each have 168 hours in every week. I sleep for 5.5 hours every night. At least that's what my app that tracks my sleep tells me. That means that I have 129.5 hours. And if you sleep for 8 hours a night, that's your choice. But I don't think that you need to, because I think the belief that you need 8 hours of sleep is the only thing that can make not sleeping as much bad for you. Just change your belief about sleep as well. It's the same as stress. At least that's what I did. And I know that for me, one of the things that I did to manage stress helped me with going to sleep as well. And that was this exercise. This might make a huge difference for you. I started keeping long journals of everything that I wanted to do at any point. Every time I would think of a new to-do, I would write it down. And in my moments of greatest stress before going to sleep, I would pick out 5. I would pick out my top 5 things that I needed to get done no matter what the next day. No matter what happened. Grandma dies, dog gets hit by a car, apartment burns to the ground. I was going to get those things done no matter what. And I think that if you start to identify before you go to bed at night, tomorrow, what are the 5 things that I'm going to do that no matter what else happens, if I do those 5 things, I will make progress in my life and I can feel good about that. And when you start to think about those things, you start to also identify, you'll see there's a column here for things that I delegated away to other people. That's why there's other random names written there. Maybe you could start to think about what are other things that other people could help me with as well. And I wanted to give you a mechanism for thinking about those things, and that's this. So this is a prioritization quadrant. These things up here that are urgent and important, those are the things that you do. These things down here in quadrant 4, those are the things that probably nobody should do. This helps you identify other things that you need to delegate and schedule in as well. Q1 is the things that you should do that you should make part of your top 5. I think as you start to develop priorities, there are also ways to help you get to the next level of making priorities. And again, all of these things are to help you deal with stress, or rather ignore stress altogether and just deal with huge workloads of things. So now that you know how to establish a system and you know how to create priorities for yourself, let's start to think about what are the things that you really should do now. The only way to identify what you really should do now is to know with certainty what it is you want to accomplish by the time that you die, and who you really are, and what you're really about. And discovering those things it's not something that you can do really quickly. It's not something that you can sit in front of a piece of paper and say to yourself, this is who I am, and just write it out. You can't just sit down at a page and say, these are the things that I want to accomplish by the time that I die. There are lists that you need to have that you constantly alter. And doing that has been some of the most productive stuff that I've done in my entire life. These are my personal mantras. When I first moved out to the office that I'm currently in now, I was the only person there during a fall campaign, and I had to go on campus by myself and build the team that I wanted until it was there. And that was difficult for me at first because it was just me. And I had just left an office behind that I had insisted to myself that I would never give up on. And I had to move out there and I had to rebuild something else by myself. And I didn't want to do that. And it took me a while to figure it out, but I realized that eventually what I needed to be about was just committing to an idea, my own personal mantra. And every morning I would say to myself, every day I will do everything I can to find people whose development I'm willing to commit 100% of my energy to. And every time I would have doubts about waking up in the morning and going on campus, I would just remind myself of that. And I would say it to myself over and over and over again in my head. And I included other mantras eventually and other things, and I added on more things. I used Evernote. You can do it on your phone and your computer. You can always have it with you. When you think of something and you're like, that's what I'm about. When someone else says something, you're like, that's me. You can just write it down. You don't have to come up with everything on your own. Nothing in the universe is wholly original. We're more or less the same, and we have about the same potential. So when someone else says something that resonates with you, you can just make that about you. You can make yourself about that. You can take those words. You don't have to come up with it on your own. Seek out role models and seek out other people. Know what you're about so that you can decide how you want to behave and what you want to do with your life. This is part of my list of how I want to be, how I want to be perceived, how I want to feel about myself, how I want to respond to things. This is my list. I've also got a much, much longer list of what I want to achieve by the end of my life. And all of these goals. And knowing these things helps me decide whether or not each day is worth doing, or all of my tasks are worth completing. It's what helps me establish priorities. This clarity of self is something that turns enormous workloads and turns them into something else that's not work at all. When you know with absolute certainty that what you're doing is what you were meant to do, because you've given yourself that clarity, not because you discovered what you're meant to do. Nobody discovers that. You first discover yourself, and then you bring yourself to what you do. But when you have those things, you don't feel stress anymore. Once you have this clarity of self. You have these priorities. You have mastery over your time. And you know you're getting a lot out of your time. What can stop you then? Well, here's the thing. It's not over. There are tons of things that can stop you. As I increase my productivity and I start to achieve a lot, there are lots of things that have gotten in my way. Normally, when I'm trying to increase my productivity and accomplish more, I do things like I start to exercise and I start to eat healthier. And it gives me more energy and allows me to achieve more in my day. And then when I finally hit some milestone, I hit some achievement, I do what I think a lot of other people do. I break down and I stop doing those things. My very first office was right across the street from a Shake Shack. And for those of you that don't know what Shake Shack is, yeah, it's incredible. The double smoke shack was something that I ate 4 or 5 times a week. And it is still amazing. I'm not disgusted by that. It's actually delicious. But my point is that good habits break down. And what we were talking about before is not pseudoscience, it's biology, it's physiology. Your cardiovascular health, the release of hormones inside of your body. And food turns into those things as well. You know, people will tell you, and we can all agree, that drugs and alcohol decrease our productivity. Not that all of you are drug addicts or anything, but you know, so what I'm saying is that when you do things that alter your state of mind, it prevents you from being the person that you decided to be. Something else is in control, and food turns into those things as well. Food changes your body chemistry, it changes your physiology, and it prevents you from achieving as much as you want to achieve. So decide to make the better choice, and to do something like drink a smoothie, and drink some more water, and be healthier. I want to talk about one other thing that's prevented me a lot from dealing with huge workloads and achieving in the past. And that is a failure to seek out the help of others. I think that sometimes pride and ego make us want to achieve things on our own. They make us want to be independent. They keep us from asking others for help. And there is a physiological response that your body has in response to enormous workloads. Not only does your heart rate increase, testosterone, adrenaline, but your brain also starts to release oxytocin, which is known as the cuddle drug, or the cuddle hormone. Oxytocin creates an incentive, a chemical incentive inside your body to seek out other people. When you hug someone, oxytocin is released. And when you experience adversity and obstacles, oxytocin is released. And if you ignore the need to seek out other people, what happens is you have a stress response to adversity. If you seek out others, more oxytocin is released. And oxytocin affects the way that you feel. Last night, I was sharing some of this talk with another district manager, Chase Warnick, who's in my division. And Chase said to me that this past week, he'd been feeling terrible about his business, and he felt like he was underachieving and like everything was going wrong. And this past week, he finally shared those feelings with other people and asked for their help, and he has experienced a complete loss of stress, a total feeling of relief. And it's not just a feeling. When oxytocin is released, oxytocin has a real impact on your body as well. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It causes vascular relaxation, which means it takes your response to adversity from one of stress towards one of courage, just like we talked about before. Here's the even crazier part. Your heart has receptors for oxytocin. And when oxytocin interacts with the cells in your heart experiences an increase in rate of heart cell regeneration, which means that when you seek out the help of others, the damage that you've done to yourself, as far as like your stress response, the damage to your health is undone by having sought out other people on a biological level. Not in your head, not how you feel. This happens to you physically inside of you. The fear of seeking out the help of others, or the fear of feeling like a fool, or the fear of not being good enough because you needed to ask other people for help, is something that doesn't just hurt your bank account, it hurts your physical well-being. So don't be afraid to ask other people for help if you're having trouble dealing with something, especially in this company. People will help you. So just to summarize everything, I want to remind you guys that stress and huge workloads, huge workloads are not themselves a bad thing. Taking on things that you feel are unachievable, setting yourself against them and trying to achieve them, that could be some of the greatest stuff that you ever do. Situations themselves are not negative. You decide whether they're negative or positive. You have the power to do that. Self-awareness of all aspects of your life and what you want to achieve is key to turning huge workloads into fulfillment. Systems for organizing your time will help you get way more done with your time. Systems for prioritizing your time will help you be happier with what you get done. Long-term clarity will help you define your priorities. Diet and exercise will always have a huge impact on your emotional state. And most importantly, you are wired to seek out the help of other people. As a species, we are wired for survival. It's why we form into tribes, into groups of people, to feel protected from the dangers of life. And when you ignore your evolutionary, your biological need to have other people helping you, you set yourself on a path towards stress and poor health. So seek out other people, because it's what you were meant to do. Let's enjoy the rest of the night.